Hello. So today's session, I wanted to finish off in terms of looking at the marketing mix on a bit of theory around communication and some of the communication models and different ways that they can sort of take place with promotion. What previous communication models have you looked at any previously? Does this ring any bells?
Looked at the send and receive model.
Yeah, so that's the Shannon Weaver one, isn't it? Which is
Yeah.
like the traditional one. Okay, that's good. So yeah, well, there's other ones that are seen as more sort of contemporary now, because obviously the sender receiver is almost like if we were marketing, I don't know, even 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, before any social media usage, that would be perfect, wouldn't it? Because we'd create an advert and you know, we'd literally just be looking at what the feedback was from it. But now there's so many different there's so much scope for noise along the way, there's so much scope for interaction. It's no longer I think it's no longer relevant really for communication in this form. I think it could be for corporate communications, for a presentation or something like that, but for marketing communication, it's not going to work in the same way as it's not going to be as helpful. So in terms of the marketing communications from an organisation, we've got the planned ones, which will be their campaign. So it could be some sort of launch for reopening of the restaurants, and we've got so much. We've got some billboard adverts locally. We've got some door drops that we've done for early bookings, and we've contacted everybody on our mailing list. So they're all our planned campaigns. And then we're also going to have some that are more interactive. So we're going to have it based on the product experience or the service experience. So this could be to do with the food or the service around it. This could be the feedback that they give afterwards. It could be the tweets that are doing in the restaurant that we pick up on. So it could be sort of quite a lot of interactive sort of live feedback that we're able to, ideally, that we can join in with. And then we've got the unplanned marketing communications. So these might be opportunities that crop up that we can capitalise on. So there could be some good things that we get, but also it could be somebody complaining about the restaurant, some negative publicity, something that happens outside of your control. That's associated with the brand. So something, for example, as I mentioned about going to the Belgrade Plaza tonight, something could happen around the Belgrade Plaza that actually is then communicated to do with maybe I don't know, something like a bomb threat or something at the Belgrade, and that then makes it has an implication on the restaurants in that area, but it's something then that my restaurant needs to get in touch and say, you know, we're still open for business as usual. It's just, so there's some sort of responsiveness there. So very little of this marketing communications can we plan, can we script. A lot of it is about having the skills to deal with conversations as they're happening. So I mentioned before about all the different adverts that we see every day that actually we don't see. That's the thing. We're not aware that we're getting messages all the time because we've only got a certain amount that we can retain or even perceive in the first place. So because of this, we need to be very careful in terms of making sure that our message stands out. Can any of you think of any examples where you can recall? We had the one example, didn't we? Was it a Volkswagen advert in the cinema that you remembered? Was that Tamsin? Did you mention that, Tamsin? Or can anyone think of an advert that's actually stood out to them? If we try and understand why.
I don't know why, but remember that old Cadbury's advert with the gorilla?
Wow. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
I was only really young at the time, but I can always remember that advert. Always just stuck out as a kid.
And did you have you ever been to Cadbury's World?
No, never.
That's really good. They have an advertising section, advertising throughout the ages, and they actually have the gorilla, obviously like the gorilla there as one of the adverts that comes on, and they've got sort of a fake huge one playing the drums that you sort of see through a glass thing that looks quite good. But Were there rumours at the time? Do you remember this as to whether the gorilla was Phil Collins?
I don't.
No, there was always like urban stories about it as well. Cadbury's are very good at creating. I think they are very good at creating adverts. Can you remember? Do any of the others stand out? So that's really good, and that's amazing because you were so little that stood out.
I
The
can't think of
one
any.
with the
Go on, the one with the
kids' eyebrows.
Yeah, I was going to say that one. And you know, and what really worked well with that, loads of people took the mickey out of it. So I remember seeing a sort of like a mickey take with Lily Allen and someone else doing it. And I'll tell you what, that just means it gets more and more and more publicity, doesn't it? So yeah, and even the music on that, you know, it comes to mind straight away. They're very good at creating almost feelings through their advertising. Does that make sense? They sort of create a real experience. And also the things that make it stand out as well, they own that purple. They've actually got intellectual property over that Pantone reference. So if you were ever to get married and want to use that purple, you're not allowed to use it on in your wedding. You know, it's very, very tightly controlled.
The Twix advert as well, where you've got the left Twix and the right Twix.
Yeah, that's again quite a sort of sensory experience, isn't it? It's imagination as well, isn't it? Which they all appeal to, our playful side. So it seems to work quite well. What about things like, you know, the Go Compare adverts? How effective do you think they are?
It's what you remember. Definitely what you remember.
Do you remember more Meerkats or Go Compare?
Meerkat.
Do you? And is it because of there being a character, or what is it about them?
I think it's like their accent, right? Like the way they like pretend to speak, because then, yeah.
It's quite silly, but seems to be really effective, doesn't it? I think they're trying to create more of a story around Go Compare at the moment with the actual guy that's doing it and trying to sort of be more relatable. But actually, I think with those ones, you don't necessarily need to remember them unless you need them, do you? And because they're on so often. But I think what works, I think the Meerkat is the voice, but on Go Compare, it's it is that opera singing. I was going to do it, and I'm not going to do it for you. But you know, that's sort of almost the what's it called, like the jingle, isn't it? That creates that process of memorization. So given that we've got our customers have got a lot on their minds, and actually, you know, possibly even more so than they had before at the moment, you know, or different things, there's an idea that on our consciousness we can only really process a couple of things at any point in time. So if you've got too much going on, or you want to ignore a couple of things, you put a few more things in your consciousness, and the other ones have to sort of bob down a bit. So in terms of getting people's attention at the right time when they're thinking about our restaurants, when do you think that would be? When do you think when would be a good time to reach people? If they're thinking of going out or thinking about booking somewhere to eat, because the thing is now they'd have to actually book somewhere as well, wouldn't they? You can't turn up in the same way at the moment.
Maybe like during the day, like while they're at work. And then
okay. And they're thinking of maybe what something you thinking that evening, or when do you think?
maybe for the evening, or like the next evening, like kind of like a distraction from their work, because like sometimes work gets a bit too much, and then you're just like, oh, so let me go and do something else type thing.
So almost like a little treat or something to look forward to, or you could position it like that, couldn't you? You've earned this, it's been a long time coming, that sort of thing, couldn't you? Get their excitement.
Yeah.
What would you show as well? Would you show the food, or would you show the socialisation if you were to show an image with it?
Probably both, and like probably drinks as well.
Yeah, you could flip the especially if we're on social media, we could have like a 3 adverts with 3 different things going on. That makes so we could sort of have a rotating advert. Oh yeah, we're just on communications, which is the last part of today's session. We've looked at promotion.
Okay.
With this is worth considering. When I've said about doing the market research on people's attitudes towards things, this is where we need to understand what people's perceptions are of our different restaurants. So and how we want to perceive them as well. So actually, if they've got if you wanted to sort of really with Valor Italia almost make it feel more sounds daft but more Italian, because actually if people aren't able to go on holiday in the same way, we could be sort of almost selling an Italian evening. Do you know what I mean? But something. So this is where we need to understand what people's perceptions are or people's stereotypes are about our brand, and then we can create an advert that fits with them or alters them actually if it's untrue. So Cafe Rouge, if we felt again we wanted to change the perception to a different age group or then we can use our knowledge of what the brand is to try and understand where we can shift it. With our messages. So just bear in mind, people have got very, very limited amounts of attention. So what we need to do is they will easily support anything. So if they've already got a positive attitude to Lassigana and you've got a really nice advert that supports that and they really like the drinks there, they like the fact they could have the student discount is still working, because you might even just do that it's still up and running and welcoming you back. Then that's going to be quite an easy thing to do. The problem is it's quite easy to shift people's it's more difficult to shift their perceptions if they're quite negative about you and you're trying to improve them. And that is a really, really tough call to make. And I think possibly why brands like Skoda still have a bit of a legacy of a sort of slightly negative perception, even though it's much, much better. Do you know what I mean? There's still a little bit of still a bit of a hangover about how they're not still seen in the same way potentially as like the likes of Volkswagen, even though they're part of the same family. So what we need to do with selective retention is we need to remind people of whatever it is that they've bought into before. So how would you use selective attention in your marketing communications? What could we do? What sort of campaign could we do? How could we use selective retention for the brands that we're looking at? I'm going to give you, so if I do a hint, start off with, imagine that you're going to get in touch with everyone that's previously been to your restaurants. What would you remind them of? How can we get them back through the doors? What would you need to do?
Tell them about the time they last came, or like create like a generic story about their experience.
And would you do that? When you say generic, then would that be sort of something that could be applicable to everyone, or would you want? Because I suppose we could do some personalisation, couldn't we? So we know they're already bought from us. So the impression there is they've obviously at some point had a positive attitude towards our brand. What do you think would stimulate them to come back in? Do you think we could just say we're open, or do you think we need to do anything more than that?
Like introductory offers and stuff like that again.
Yeah, I think we need to create some excitement potentially, don't we? So we're back, we're open, and we can't wait to see you again. Old friends welcome, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Where you've got something where you've sort of and say to welcome our previous, our former or our previous customers back in. we've got these special offers. And yeah, I think that could then encourage bookings, couldn't it? One thing you've really got in your favour at the moment is because you've got limited capacity. It's this idea of demand and supply. When we've only got so many bookings that we can take in, it almost makes it more like you want to get a booking. So when you're sort of looking at what time's available and there aren't very many times left, it makes you want to book earlier, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Because it sort of gives the impression it's really popular. And actually, that's a really good way of encouraging people to book. Does this make sense? Have you ever had this where you're trying to book on something and there's just not much availability and it almost makes you more keen? Totally talking to myself. Has anyone had that where when you've been trying to get something where it's almost sold out?
There was a new restaurant opened near me, and they opened just before the Eat Out to Help Out thing.
Yeah.
And they weren't taking bookings. So people ended up like queuing for hours just so that they could, get a spot and like look. I don't know how to explain it, but like seem like they were like cool by eating in that restaurant.
Yeah, through association, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and okay, if I was being really devious and I was one of these restaurants, I'd put the number of tables that are left at any point in time, and I'd actually not open up a full restaurant. Does that make sense? So I'd only open it up if it looks like we were getting full. So you sort of almost, it looks like you've only got a limited number of options, so you need to book sooner rather than later. Because I think by doing that, it sort of gives the impression that we can't hang around here. We need to book now. So just have a think on this, just how it's going to be, because actually the restaurant capacity is going to be reduced because of any restrictions that we've got once we open up. And we need to show that we're sort of COVID friendly. But I think special offers to encourage people in, remind them that you exist. That may be enough, and then talk about actually how we're addressing, how we're ensuring we still give you a fabulous experience and yet keeping you safe. Because I think keeping you safe is more positive language than mentioning COVID. Does that make sense? Because it's choice of language as well. And I think we need to be very careful if we've got older, more vulnerable customers in terms of the language, so it doesn't scare them. So actually, if they're thinking of booking with us, they will. So if we're creating an advert, we need to make sure that we see it at the right time, right place. And back to our experience of Cadbury's adverts, you know, this was a time when television advertising, that was how people consume their advertising, wasn't it? Whereas I think now it's harder to get that overall consumption really of an advert. We want people to stop and pay attention. So again, is everyone aware of the gorilla advert that we heard about, the Cadbury's one?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is it that makes it that gets people's attention? So the second point here.
That gorillas playing drums.
Yeah, could be.
I think the music's obviously the music obviously appealed to probably the older audience, because obviously they're more aware of Phil Collins, and then you've got the gorilla player and the drums is probably going to appeal to like a bit of a younger audience in a way.
Yeah, so you've got the sort of silly versus the almost the more heritage type thing. Okay, and it's just the sublime. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? And that sort of gets people's attention, which just doesn't happen. Now, okay, how does it work for a chocolate bar or a chocolate brand? It didn't eat the chocolate or anything while he was playing, did he?
Just the purple, wasn't it? I think it was a purple.
It's the purple, the recognition of the purple, isn't it?
But yeah, I think it was just like you say, one of them adverts. It was just to get people talking, and it did.
And it did, and it still does, and it's still one that people remember. And actually, probably if they heard that music, especially the drum bit of it, I think people are more likely to think of Cadbury than they are Phil Collins, or do you know what I mean? I think the association's closer. Right, Cadbury are in a very fortunate position that they're the brand knowledge of Cadbury is really high, and actually the sentiment towards Cadbury, I think it's a little bit less positive now because it's been bought by Mondelez, and I think it's sort of changed a little bit in terms of how people perceive it as a family heritage brand. But I think particularly at that point as well, it was, you know, it's part of the sort of British Constitution, wasn't it? It was a big part of people growing up, and I think particularly in this area as well, actually, because it's sort of Midlands, been coming from sort of Birmingham way as well. It was a huge part of the heritage. So actually, what I'm getting at here, it didn't. Strangely enough, it almost didn't matter about the product being in it because it was all about Cadbury generally, wasn't it? It's a bit like Coca-Cola and the big lorry at Christmas. It doesn't matter so much that it's the product, is it? It's more about the brand and our feelings towards the brand. So I think the brands like Coca-Cola and I think Cadbury as well, they're more about putting that brand's position top of our mind. So again, it just confirms that it's a brand we really love and really like, and it's something that we've got a very clear association with. With the restaurant one, they need people to consider eating out there more often, don't they? They want people. I think any brands where they've been shut for a while are very, very keen for people to get booked up now, aren't they? So I think there needs to be a stronger call to action. Whereas actually with the Cadbury one, it was more about brand recognition, so that next time we're out and about and we shop it, and that we'd naturally, and we wouldn't even think about why we're doing it, we're going for Cadbury. So we've got this idea here. So based on a couple of different communication models, people seem to want to fit in the picture when it comes to communication about brands that they love. So are there any products that you relate to in terms of sort of having quite a high level of involvement in that you talk about, or anything that you're a bit of a fan of?
Jack Daniels.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
And do you sort of photograph yourself drinking it, or how do you get?
No, I just like it a lot compared to the other. I've tried all like the cheaper ones, like the Aldi and the little ones, but they're just not the same.
Ah, okay. And do you try variations as well? Because they've got different ones, haven't they?
Yeah, the honey one's nice. The apple one's decent as well.
Yeah.
So
So
what would another good one to drink, Rob? Try Maker's Mark.
Yeah, it's all right. It's still, I'd say it's still not the same for me.
Oh, I like it more. I still like Jack Daniels.
Yeah, it's not interesting because it's very. And have you ever done blind tests on it as well? So you absolutely, or have you always known it's?
No, I haven't done a blind test. No.
No, that sounds
been
really
blind drunk,
daft.
but
Yeah, I know. But it's sometimes because they do that. Right. Have you ever heard of the Pepsi and Coke challenge, the taste test challenge that they do?
no.
Oh, they do it. They used to do it every single year. Every summer they do a taste test challenge between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, right? And then it was a sort of, so you didn't know which one you were drinking, and you got 2 cups, and they got people to say which one they preferred. So, which is the biggest seller? Would you think, Coca-Cola or Pepsi Cola?
I'm just
Coke,
yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah, I was gonna say Coke's probably the best seller, but I'm sure Pepsi came out as a shock.
So yeah, Coca-Cola are the market leaders in terms of sales. Pepsi, hats down always in terms of taste. It's quite interesting. So I think if you take away your knowledge of the brand, it would be interesting to see, because you've ever seen it, like, there's these TV, well, not that any one of you watch TV, but they used to do these challenges around people's houses where they'd sort of swap certain brands, but you wouldn't know if they'd swapped all of them, and then got them to try them, and people were like, oh, that's definitely my Heinz tomato soup, and it wasn't. So it's quite interesting. But I think a key part of the product is the brand. So actually the fact it's always got to be Jack Daniels is quite interesting. That's really good example, thank you. In terms of like brands that people, it means something to own one, would you say that's where Aston Martin fits in, where people are very involved, are very much, they treat that as part of their identity?
I think people do buy Aston Martins because they have experienced or had an Aston Martin before, and there's like obviously you've got friends probably with Aston Martins, owners clubs and stuff like that, and they want to be associated with the brand.
Yeah, so it is a level of yeah, it is a sort of a part of their identity, isn't it, by being that, and they join the club by doing it as well, in terms of like literally, but also perceptually as well, aren't they? They're sort of, it shows something about them. Okay, so self-involvement's another so I'm thinking here about why people are getting involved with the products that we're talking about. The only thing I'd say is, and this is where you need to do your research, I don't know how much people feel this closely about restaurant brands. I think they do about Nando's, or they did. Do you think the feeling towards Nando's is still as positive as it always was?
I think that there used to be a bit, well, just from first-hand experience of hearing people talk about it and stuff, there used to be a lot more of a hype around Nando's than there is these days.
Yeah, about 7 years ago, I remember, and it sort of really...
Cheeky Nando's.
Yeah, the cheeky Nando's, and it was always at its peak, and you'd have, you know, people who was teaching full-time who were living on very limited means. After class, we'd be going to Nando's. You're like, blimey, you know, that's a sort of treat for us, and yet they're sort of using their, yeah. So it has died down, do you reckon, a little bit?
I think it's like you say, everything has a time of being a trendy time, if you like,
Yeah.
where something's the in trend, and obviously then something else comes and takes over as the in trend.
Yeah, I think the key is to try and, so it's a cycle rather than it just dying, and brands that have done that, things like Vans, you know, the like the trainer type shoe brand, Vans.
Oh, Vans, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I knew it was the way of saying it. That's been going a long time, and it hasn't always been like on, but it's come back and back, hasn't it? You know, 25 years ago it was on trend. It seems to be reasonably so now. I'm not sure, but it's Dr. Martens. That's another one. Even things like Hush Puppies, they go back. They come back, and then also different brands are popular in different countries at different times. Like, I didn't realise in African countries how popular Clark shoes are. I mean, did you know this?
Well, I didn't know they're popular in Africa, and I've seen the latest. They're doing some like collaborations with like African countries, aren't they, and stuff. Have you seen?
Are they? Oh, so
new
that's
designs.
possibly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've got sort of, I don't know if you've seen any of the adverts for, again, it's because brands are trying to get into communities, you see, and sort of almost be seen part of their own. The Guinness has done that in Africa as well, where they've really sort of tried to sort of filter into the community. And it's just interesting here. Just bear in mind that brands go in, like as we said, in and out of fashion. And so actually it's about trying to be on trend again. And if you've got 3 brands that you're working with, you can do something with that, can't you, in terms of like how to sort of get, almost you want them peaking at different times, don't you? So you've sort of always got one. Do you remember the things with the cash cows and the stars and the problem children? Do you know what I'm on about? The sort of the Boston Consultant Matrix.
No, not me.
Yeah, no. What was that? Sorry, it went a bit weird when.
No, I don't know. Well, I'm saying I've not heard that personally, but
yeah. So there's this idea that you've got a product portfolio, and that you've got some that are like your cash cows, like Coca-Cola's a cash cow, so it just keeps generating money all the time. But then you've got others that are really into the market that are like they could go really well, but you're not sure if they are, and they're called the question marks. Then you've got ones that are like there's a growing market, but they're not that popular. They're called like the question. They're the problem child. And then you've got once they go out of fashion, they're called like a dog. So they go round this cycle depending on how fashionable they are. And I'm just saying here, it's almost like what you want is, if you've got a couple of different brands, all the time one of them needs to be, at least one needs to be on trend, really. But what we want is people to connect with our brand, to talk about it. So imagine if we're going for the older customer in Cafe Rouge, you know, they need to be checking in on Facebook, you know, because that's actually where their friends are going to be. They need to be talking about it on there. They need to be in different forums to actually the younger, which might be more of the TikTok, Instagram for Lassie Garnus. And let me tell you, where do we reckon they're at? What sort of age?
like a family restaurant, aren't they? I think it's where you go to have children.
I think they've got something for every age range, don't you?
Yeah.
I don't think they're not trying to be a McDonald's. They shouldn't be. You know, they're positioned very differently. McDonald's do really well. The worse the economy, because they do their pound safe menu when things get really bad. And I've noticed, I mean, they seem to have done exceptionally well during lockdown as well. They're just always just seem to be consistently busy. But we're not competing with them, I don't think, at all, because you're offering a different sort of experience, aren't you? But I think, yeah, you're going from Lazigana students younger through to Bella Italia for our sort of family stage, through to through to Cafe Rouge when I'm sort of retired and meeting a friend for lunch, or you know, so potentially, yeah, we've got it all covered. So we need to make the most of it all. So this is the Shannon Weaver one, the one you've heard, the original one where we came up with the advertising campaign, the gorilla and the music. We encode it and create the adverts. The message goes out there on TV. It's talked about, people interpret it, decode it, have a few stories. Is it Phil Collins? Is it someone else? Is it a real gorilla? Yeah, which I still thought it was, which was a bit daft. And then, you know, you've got the receiver, what they're interpreting from it and the conversations they're having. So that's one way. But actually, now what we're talking about isn't going to be like that. We're talking about using influencers here. And the idea is there may be some sort of campaign that's put out there. There may be some sort of messages. But we've got all these different people that are talking about it, and they're talking to each other. And actually, the people we want to be getting to are the T4s, the opinion leaders or influencers. You know, these are the ones where we're paying for them to use the product. We're offering it to them for free. And actually, our audience may hear from us, but it's far more interested about what so-and-so is wearing or what so-and-so is doing or using. Do influencers now have to say if it's a paid for? Do you know, is that part of the advertising standards?
I think they do, yeah.
I think they do. I don't think they used to a number of years ago, but I think it has to be really transparent now, doesn't it? Yeah, okay. Do you think that's changed people's perception of actually whether they'd still buy it or not, or do you think it doesn't matter?
Yeah, I think so, because if you're, say if you followed someone on Instagram for a while, an influencer, and then as you said, when you notice an ad and they're being paid for, it's going to be what that company kind of wants you to say about it, not necessarily your own opinion as such. Of course, they do kind of put their own opinion on it, but it's not going to be as negative as what it may actually be. So it is kind of, you know, selling it for them then, isn't it? Rather than just awareness.
And I think it's how rational people are in their processing as well. And I think actually if they're really keen on an opinion leader, they're likely to be less rational, because they're sort of, everything they do, they sort of feel is, I don't know, they're just less objective. So yeah, just bear in mind the communication isn't now, it's not coming from the company. It is, but it's the way the company works with other people, and they've realised that actually the power in the relationships aren't necessarily from credible sources. They're from people that people like and relate to. So in terms of our personal influence, we've got opinion leaders. Now, these are the people that are our influencers. These are the people that are just really popular, but they haven't, not popular because they're, sounds really bad, not popular because they're good at anything. They're just popular. Can you, so who are the biggest influencers at the moment? Which sort of names are ones to watch out for?
I guess I don't really know any TikTokers, but I presume up to the younger generation, they'd probably be one of the biggest ones.
Usually people that go on these bloody programs like Love Island and that, isn't it, really?
Oh my God, the money they make as a result of those, it's just...
Wasn't it that Mrs. Hinch?
Yeah, she seems, and it's, I've taught quite, when I've taught your colleagues and they're like, at the class above, they're always like, my missus really likes Mrs. Hinch, and they're sort of, yeah, she seems to be...
She's got like her own range, isn't she? Like,
is it cleaning products or something?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
but it's really odd, because it's like cleaning products for sort of people in their 20s. You know, it's not a natural fit, is it? Really strange how these people come into prominence. But yes, I agree, Mrs. Hinch. And I think TikTok seems to be, when they're looking at creating advertising now for the university and engaging with people, they're all watching. The marketing department does a lot of research on TikTok, which just seems bizarre when you've got like 40-year-old people watching watching TikTok and then trying to come up with stuff, because you just feel like it's almost not the right. They need to be liaising with because actually when people want to go to university, their decisions are starting to be formed in their early teens, actually, what their perceptions are. So that's what they're trying to influence them at that stage. So I think TikTok is a channel for younger, and then I think there's celebrities on all forms of platforms, aren't there? Or non-celebrities, if you like. Opinion formers. So these are people that you listen to them because of, they know what they're saying, they know what they're doing. It's based on formal expertise. Give me some examples of someone that you'd listen to, like by role, not necessarily the person. Anyone that you've been to that you think actually, because they've said that, you've changed what you buy or how you do things?
I like to. Sorry, I might have missed the first part of the question, but if I listen to someone influence me on a product, I like to make sure that they are like a known expert in that area of product.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Oral-B have worked very, very closely with dentists, actually, and what they do, they even give dentists free samples of toothpaste as well. And so they've been very keen. The opinion formers is where almost in the adverts they pretend to be dentists, or they look like, it's sort of ones where they're trying to be really credible. And it's almost like if your doctor were to say, I think you should try this or do that, you're more likely to listen to them because that's why you're there in the first place. So opinion formers, it comes from people who actually, we believe what they're saying because of their credibility in the field. Opinion followers, most of us are that. And then word of mouth is the most powerful way. It's so much more powerful than advertising. It's so much more credible. And then a variation of this is electronic word of mouth, which is what we use digitally to share, to like things, to share them, to tweet about them. So electronic word of mouth is really where people are doing reviews on different websites, and that's where we need to be. Now the way word of mouth works, just to sort of go into that a little bit more, it works best when someone actually asks you. So rather than me telling you about my experience at Bella Italia just because I've seen you and you said, how are you? And then I go on and on about it. It works best if you were to say, I'm thinking of going out somewhere to eat. Have you got anywhere that you'd recommend? That then is where word of mouth is at its best, because it's tailored. It's a two-way conversation. It's based on our knowledge of, and actually knowledge that's helpful to you. So when it comes to promotions, we want to make sure that we've got a budget that's affordable. We can do this by having a budget that's a percentage of, so if we've got a certain turnover and we're putting 25% of it on, I'm just so sorry about this, just 1 second. Right, I'm back on it. Sorry about that toilet situation. Right, so when we're establishing the budget, we either do it as to what we can afford. We look at, quite often, traditionally, organisations would do it based on a percentage of their turnover or sales. So they'd sort of expect to put 20% of their sales value onto marketing. We do it based on, we're saying, well, as a brand, what we want to do is we want to put we want to get a bigger market share than what's the one I'm going to, Pizza Express. So we've looked, and Pizza Express spend 2 million on their advertising, so therefore we're going to spend 3 million. So that's called competitive parity. So we're looking at what's equal in terms of paired with the competition, then we're going higher or lower. Or we do it based. Now, objective and task is where you go, well, we're doing a launch campaign, so we want to get sort of 85% occupancy of our seats. So we're going to do this campaign that's going to cost us 10 grand to get that level of occupancy. Or so you're basically doing it on different set targets that you want to achieve. And then through doing that, you're going to spend such an amount of money on that. So they're the ways that we'd set ourselves marketing budgets. So based on those, which do you think would be the best way for the casual dining group to do it in terms of the amount of money they're spending on their marketing? Would they do it based on their campaigns? They do it objective and task? Do you think they should put any money they can afford on it? Do you think they should do it generating on how much they feel they should spend on sales? What do you reckon? Because it's a tough one, isn't it, to know how much money to spend on it, especially when they haven't had any income for the last, or very little, just on sort of takeaway.
Probably potentially percentage of sales. You should only do it comparatively to what you're selling, really. I think if you do it by forecast, difficult to forecast the footfall at the moment, because of the situation you're in. And again, competitors don't really know either, so to go by competitors, it's difficult.
I think so. I almost would be tempted. I think given the bad position they're in, I'd go all they can afford at the moment. I'll go all out because I do wonder whether shortly after when we finish our assignment, whether they'll still be in business. I just think, but I do think it's a time at the moment where you could get quite a lot of business in, but you just don't know, do you?
They've been closed, haven't they? Sorry, I've not been up to speed on the casual dining group, so I should have probably been at the minute. But how can they do a budget off percentage of sales if they've not been open?
Yeah, this is what we're just saying, that actually you could do it previously based on sales, but they only they might have had a takeaway like menu.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Like that's why I'm just worried.
Yeah, so could have done that. So yeah, they've got three brands within it. But yeah, I think it's very difficult. They can't do stuff historically, and actually predictions going forwards. It's just a really difficult time at the moment to come up with anything, really, isn't it? The marginal approach might be the one. So the marginal one is where we say put so much money for this launch, and then we just see actually then if we look to increase it, do we get more sales in, or do we, if we decrease it, do we get a reduction in sales at the same level? So marginal might work, but you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? And as you say, competitive parity, I think it's just really difficult to know what they're doing because they're not going to share it openly. So on this then, you can go to town a bit on the communication theory. We've got quite a lot that we can talk about. If I just go, so place, to sort of recap what we've talked about, we've got there the focus of your effort and activity is very much about the eating in experience. But we know as well there's some interesting other options that people are open to, and that might help to increase our brand. Promotion, as we spoke about, it's got to match our target audience. And we know that actually our initial campaigns are about getting people back in there. So we can look at direct mailing to the existing customers, we can look at mail shotting or leaflet dropping near stores, but actually digital seems to be a key because we need to be interactive if we do that. And then actually the communications theory, I think there we're talking about that interactive model. I think that could be really helpful. And then we also had to look at marketing budgets as well, in terms of how do we set those, and actually the challenges around that at the moment, because we've just got so many unknowns. So I think that's what I wanted to cover this time. Next time there's an extended marketing mix which covers it covers not just the product price, promotion, price, it then extends to the people, the physical evidence, and the processes. So that takes into account the service experience. So we're going to look at that next time. We're also going to look at the international